Okay, good. We're recording. All right, so let's jump into chapter 1 here and discuss, all right, anatomy and physiology. All right, now, if you look here, you're probably thinking, well, that doesn't look like, honey, that doesn't look like the textbook that I have. And you're right. You would be absolutely right. This, what you're looking at is the 3rd edition. All right. I'm going to be using the 3rd edition slides for this class. All right. It's pretty much the same material. All right. But I love the notes for this. So just kind of keep that in mind. No big deal. It's all going to be good. Okay. All right. So let's talk about anatomy and physiology. And I got to tell you, I really wish when I was in undergrad and when I was in med school that they had taught this material to me in an integrated approach. Basically, when I was in school, and this was a long time ago, to give you a little bit of a history on myself, I'm originally from Rochester, New York. That's considered to be the upstate or western portion of New York State, closer to Canada than anything else. I went to college, left New York at the age of 17, went down to college in Charleston, South Carolina, studied health and physical education at the Citadel Military School of South Carolina. Okay, and that's where I really took my first anatomy and physiology. And both of those classes were completely separate. So in the fall semester, I took anatomy. In the spring semester, I took physiology. This way is way better. It's just way, way better. And so I'm hoping that you can benefit from this integrated approach. And then afterwards, I graduated a long time ago. In fact, this November is going to be my 25th college reunion. So that kind of gives you a little bit of idea of where I am. All right. Anyways, let's talk about anatomy and physiology. Okay. So one of the things that you have to understand, and I can guarantee you that you are, whoops, let me go back. I can guarantee you that you are going to see, all right, questions on this, all right, on the test. So anatomy is basically going to be form and structure of the body, okay? So when you hear a term like form or structure or structural anatomy, all right, then you need to think of the actual physicality, the anatomy of whatever it is that we're talking about. All right. So physiology is basically the function or the how things work. Okay. So physiology is the function, anatomy is the form and structure. Okay. So a physiologist is going to be looking at certain cells or tissues or organs, and they're going to be able to tell you how these things are working. How does the stomach digest proteins? All right. How do muscles contract? What is going on to cause the muscles to contract? So the big concept here is that both anatomy and physiology, or form and function, are interrelated. Okay? So one understanding, all right, of anatomy will help you with another understanding of physiology. Okay? So that's how we're going to kind of integrate this class so you understand the overall health, all right, of an organism, specifically the human organism, and how it's going to perform. Okay. So to do that, all right, and I'm a big fan of the scientific method. And I've got to tell you, if you've been on this planet for the past 2 years, when we talk about, especially with everything with COVID and everything that's going on, all right, scientific method is extremely important. And it's extremely important because you can apply it to everyday occurrences. All right. So the scientific method always starts off with observing. Okay, you're going to observe something. All right, I do it all the time. You know, if I'm sitting in a park, I look at people and how they walk, because that's what I do. I analyze their gaits and see if there's any structural anomalies occurring. So I start to observe something. And during that observation, I might form what's called a hypothesis. And that hypothesis is a way of how I'm explaining what I'm observing. All right, if I see somebody limping, I can be like, well, maybe they've sprained their ankle, or maybe their knee is hurt, or maybe they have a hip issue going on. All right. So once you've observed something, then you'll come up with hopefully an explanation through a hypothesis. So now I have to see if my hypothesis is a workable hypothesis, all right? Meaning, all right, does it explain what I'm observing? So how do I do that? I need to collect data. Well, how do I collect the data? I run experiments. You know, a lot of the time it'll be through tests, right? So I'm going to test this. That's how we came up with the vaccine, all right? So we're like, all right, we have this compound that we think is going to be a good vaccine for COVID-19. So now how do we determine that it's a good thing for COVID-19? Well, we're going to start testing it on the virus, okay? And during those tests and those experiments, we collect data. And hopefully that data is going to support the hypothesis. And guess what? It's okay if it doesn't, all right? Hopefully it will, because then we're on the right track. But guess what? If it doesn't, that's still okay, because then we can reject the hypothesis, or we can modify it a little bit and change it around and say, okay, all right, so all right, compound X wasn't working, so let's tweak it. Maybe let's try compound Y, which is completely different, and see if that works. Okay, so the scientific method is really important. And for those of you that might be going into the medical field, be it a nurse, doctor, physical therapist, dental hygienist, all right, you use the scientific method without even realizing that you use it. We do it all the time, all right? We observe things all the time, and then we figure out, all right, you know, I observed somebody wearing some crazy outfit, and then I make a hypothesis for it. Well, why did they make that? Why are they wearing that outfit? Are they just have an incredibly bad taste in fashion? And then I see them the next day and they're wearing something completely different. I'm like, well, I guess they don't have bad taste in fashion. Maybe they just ran out of laundry or something. All right. So we use the scientific method all the time. And so that's going to help us, all right, through this course and how we address certain things. So I want to start off talking about anatomy first. Okay. So we're going to pay specific attention, all right, to, again, when we're talking about anatomy, you're going to keep repeating this in your head: structure and form. Okay. So let's start off with the smallest form of anatomy, which is microscopic anatomy. Now, this course does not involve microscopic anatomy, okay? But we use microscopic anatomy to observe cells and certain tissues here, okay? So we're going to use the microscope, all right, to examine, all right, specimens of cells and tissues, all right, because we can't see that, all right, with just our eyes. So we have two subdivisions to microscopic anatomy. One is cytology, all right, and so I'm going to tell you this right now. Cytology, C, all right, begins with a C. Well, so does cells. Okay, so that's how I remember it. Cytology is the study of cells. Okay, and everything inside the cell. Histology, or histo, is the study of tissues. I hated histology. I've taken many histology classes. And every time I took a histology class, I hated it less. All right. And my students in my past classes laugh because by the time they're done with me, if you're, I would say, unfortunate enough to take me in 211, just kidding. But if you take me in 211, because there's a lot of histology in 211, all right, they're surprised when I tell them that I hated histology because of how much I talk about it. Okay, so histology is going to be the study of tissues. All right, so now we're going to get to what we call gross anatomy. It's also known as macroscopic anatomy. Now you can check everything out, all right, with your eyes. You don't need any help. Okay, we don't need a microscope. We don't need an electron microscope or any of that. Okay, so what we'll usually do is dissect our specimens. Right now, unfortunately, we don't do any wet dissections. We're not going to be around cadavers in this course. We have to use models. Okay, so we call that a dry dissection. So there's certain subdivisions of gross anatomy. There's systemic anatomy, and so that basically is going to be the study of each of the systems in our body. Okay, 211 is predominantly systemic anatomy. Okay, right off the bat, you are going to just go through, all right, all of the systems. In this course, we start off, all right, at a basic foundation. The strongest, most important part of any building or house is the foundation. We need to build you a strong foundation. I promise you this. I've been teaching this course for many years. All right, I promise you this. If you build a strong foundation in this class, you will find 211 to be way easier than 210. Okay, some people might disagree with that, but most of my students have said that they get a strong foundation in 210. All right, it'll carry through for this class and into 211. Okay, regional anatomy. All right, what that means is we're going to pick a certain region of the body and we're going to study that. For example, your arms or legs are part of the appendicular skeleton, right? The appendages, right? So we'll look at certain regions and study it that way. Surface anatomy is going to be studying what's on the surface of our body, pretty much everything on your skin, all right? And any of the internal body structures that kind of poke through your skin, all right? That would be like your ribs, for example, or your ankles. You know, you have those two knobs on either side. Those are called the lateral and medial malleoli, okay? That's what surface anatomy discusses. Comparative anatomy, if you've ever dissected a fetal pig, a cat, all right, we're going to be using different species to compare to our anatomy because they're similar, okay? So we obviously call that comparative anatomy. And then embryology, one of my great nemesis, right? But embryology is going to be studying pretty much all the developmental changes that occur at the point of conception to birth. And you'll get into embryology in a little bit more detail in the latter portion of 211. We're not really going to discuss embryology too much in this course because embryology could be its own course. And to do it any justice, you pretty much have to make it its own course, all right? And then when we talk about, all right, looking at diagnosing and researching certain things, we will discuss pathology or pathologic anatomy and radiographic anatomy, right? Pathologic anatomy is fun because now you're going to look at all the anatomic changes that are caused by diseases, okay? So we call that pathology. We'll talk a little bit about pathology, but that's for another course. We actually offer a pathophysiology course here at Greenville Tech, all right? So my job is to teach you everything that's going to be normal. And then when you take a pathology course, then you get to learn what happens when normal no longer exists and a disease process takes over. And then of course, the radiographic anatomy, all right, we're going to be using certain imaging tools, an X-ray machine, a CT machine, an MRI machine, ultrasound, any of those to actually look at the internal structures, okay? This is a test question. Okay, it's a great true-false test question. Anatomy is a dynamic, changing science. That's absolutely correct. It is changing. Some people think, well, how could it possibly be changing? You know, we pretty much look the same, all right, all the time. And that's true for the most part, but we're still discovering. We found two muscles at the base of your skull in 1996 called the suboccipital muscles. We also discovered another muscle in your leg, all right, about 5 years ago. All right. And then finally, we found another structure inside the cell because up until that point, we were using two-dimensional microscopic technology. Well, they have now three-dimensional microscopes. And so they were able to find a new structure inside the cells that help with the immune function of the cells. Pretty cool stuff. So that's what we're talking about. Anatomy is dynamic. It's changing. We're making new discoveries all the time, and we're learning quite a bit. All right. So that's anatomy. Let's talk about physiology. What's physiology? How does something work? Or the function, okay? We're going to focus on the function. So a lot of time when we're talking about physiology, we're really going to focus on the molecular and cellular level, all right? So when we think of molecular level, think of atoms, molecules, all right? And then the cell level, all right? That's going to be the smallest living structure that you're going to find inside of our bodies, okay? So some of the subdisciplines, all right, cardiovascular physiology. I won't go through all these in detail, but heart, blood vessels, and the actual blood is going to be covered in cardiovascular physiology. Neurophys, that's going to be the nervous system and the nerves. All right, respiratory organs, that's going to include your lungs, all right, and any associated organs. So all of these you're going to pretty much study in Bio 211, except for this one, which is one of my specialties. All right, neurophys, we're going to go into that. All right, that's in chapter 12. So we'll go over neurophysiology. But respiratory physiology, reproductive physiology, pathophysiology, again, that's when you're going to get in. You won't really do pathophysiology in the Bio 210 and 211. All right, but like I said, you're going to do the regular physiology in 211, except for neurophys. All right, I'll go over that with you. All right, so how do we integrate these? All right, form and function, keep that in mind. Form and function. Form is anatomy, function is physiology. All right, we fuse both of these together. And so as I teach you the anatomy, which is usually what we start off with first, we teach you the anatomy and then we explain to you how the anatomy works. And that's pretty much what we're talking about. All right, so you'll see this term down here, all right, which says form follows function. Okay. And like it says there, the anatomical structures are designed to perform their specific function. All right, so you'll see, all right, as we go through, especially when we go into and talk about digestion, all right, certain cells are designed to help break down food and absorb that food for nutrients. All right, another example is in the lungs. All right, you have the air sacs there. They're called alveoli. All right. And the alveoli are these small grape-like looking structures that are very, very thin-walled structures. And on one side of that wall, you have oxygen or carbon dioxide. On the other side of that wall, you have the blood, all right, in which oxygen is going to go into, okay? And that oxygen, all right, will move from the alveoli into the blood vessels and circulate through your body. All right, so it's very important that you understand the anatomy of these alveoli because they're very thin walled, all right, and that allows for gas to move from one compartment to another. You don't want a thick wall, all right? I don't want it to be 50 cell layers thick. It's much easier to move an oxygen molecule across one cell layer than it is for it to move across 50 cell layers, okay? All right, so this will help you. So once you figure out the makeup of these anatomical structures, then you're going to be able to understand their function. All right, and I'm going to help you with that. I'm going to teach you all that. Okay, I'm going to walk with you. We're going to be hand in hand, and we're going to go and through this material. And there's going to be times where you're going to get frustrated, and it's going to be very difficult. And then that's when you ask me questions. And then I'll explain it to you in the simplest of ways, because guess what? I am the smartest dumb guy that you'll ever meet. Okay, and so I'm going to help you with all of this to the best that we both can work with one another, okay? All right, so let's talk about, all right, the different levels of organization, okay? Because all organisms have different levels of organization. And we're one of the most complex, but we're going to start off at the simplest level, and that's how this course is designed. We start at the smallest or simplest level, and then we're going to go to the complex level. All right. So chapter 2 is going to deal with the chemical level, which is the atoms and the molecules. Chapter 4 is then going to deal with the cellular level. Chapter 5 then deals with the tissue level. Okay. And then from that point on, we're going to get into the other chapters, which are going to cover the systems. So keep in mind, chemical level, atoms and molecules. And then we're going to stick a bunch of these molecules together, and we're going to eventually wind up with cells. This is a great test question. Basic unit of life, all right, is going to be a cell. All right. Then we're going to take a bunch of cells and stick them together. They're going to be similar to one another, and they're all going to perform a certain function, either absorption, or it'll secrete something, or it will filter something, okay? Then we have a tissue. And then what we do is we take a whole bunch of different tissues and we stick those together and we get an organ, like your stomach. Your stomach is made up of 4 different types of tissues. Okay? There are 4 tissues in the human body. Simple, right? There's only 4 types of tissues. And I'll go over this in more detail, but you might as well hear it first here because you're going to hear it 100 more times throughout this course. The first type is called epithelial tissues. All right. The second is called connective tissue. All right. Those 2 are pretty tough, but the last 2 are easy. The third type is muscle tissue, and the fourth type is nervous tissue. Those are your 4 tissue types. That's it, 4. Okay. And I know you can know this because my son already knows it, and I never taught it to him. He learned it in school, and he learned it when he was in 6th or 7th grade. So I know you can do it. All right. So now we're going to take a bunch of organs and stick them together, and then we are going to create an organ system: cardiovascular system, respiratory system, digestive system, reproductive system. And once we take all of the organ systems and we put them together in which they're functioning all together, then we've reached the organismal level. That's us. Okay. I'll go into a little bit more detail when we go into lab. Okay. All right. So let's switch gears here. Okay. And talk about homeostasis. This is a test question, almost guarantee you. Okay. You need to know what the definition of homeostasis is. All right. So some people will describe it as a state of health. All right. If somebody looks healthy, then you have to assume that their body's in homeostasis. And basically, all right, it's your body's ability to maintain what we call a consistent internal environment, all right, in response to an ever-changing external condition or internal conditions that are going on. Okay. So, for example, temperature. Okay, if you're in your nice air-conditioned house where you might be right now, and if you walk outside, it's probably 90 degrees or at least 88 degrees, you're going to go from a relatively cool environment to a hot environment. So certain changes are going to occur. But at the same time, your body always has to maintain that normal body temperature. So when you put yourself into a hot environment, your body is going to be working to keep your body cool. If it fails to do that, then you enter a state of disease, or some would describe it as, I hate it when my computer does this, dis-ease. Okay. So homeostasis, you need to know that definition. Okay. So your body is constantly relying on all these physiological processes, all right, and therefore, as we know, physiology relies on anatomy, okay? So your body is constantly relying on all these physiological processes going on to make sure that your internal environment is relatively constant. Body temperature, for example, okay? Blood pressure, heart rate, all of those, breathing rates, right? So it's constantly monitoring all of these vitals, right? When you go to your doctors and they ask you to step on the scale, they take your blood pressure and they take your pulse, right? They call those taking your vitals, okay? So your vitals need to be in a certain range, and that's what they're looking for, because if they're outside of this certain range, that's when the doctor or nurse practitioner, where they get concerned. Okay, so your body is constantly monitoring all these processes, and it makes adjustments, all right, according to what's going on, all right, to your body or within your body. Okay, we'll get into more detail on all this. All right, trust me, I always start off with a very broad picture, and then I bring it into more detailed. All right. So let's talk about the components of the homeostatic systems. This is huge, and I'm going to tell you this right now, folks. You need to have this memorized. Not only that, you have to understand it pretty much to perfection, because you're going to see this in a lot of chapters throughout this course and into 11. So do yourself a favor now, memorize it, understand it. all right? Because then everything else in some of these more difficult chapters that will come on later, it will be much more easier for you to understand. So there's three components when we talk about our homeostatic systems, okay? The first component is a receptor. The second component is our control center. And the third is effector. So I need you to know those terms because you're going to hear me saying it constantly all the time, all right? So let's talk about the receptor, okay? The receptor is a structure that's going to be, all right, in your body somewhere. For example, your eyes, all right, are going to monitor visual stimuli, okay? You have, let me use the example about the temperature. You have, all right, thermoreceptors in your skin, and their job is to monitor temperature, okay? And so these thermoreceptors are going to detect changes, all right, in the temperature, all right? That's our variable, temperature changes, okay? So in order for a receptor to be activated, to be stimulated, it needs what we call a stimulus, all right? So our receptors are specific to certain types of stimuli. For example, your eyes cannot detect auditory stimuli. Your eyes can't detect sound, right? Those receptors aren't designed for that. And conversely, your ears cannot detect visual stimuli. They're not designed for that, okay? So the receptor is specific to a certain stimulus. So those thermoreceptors, aptly named, all right, because temperature, those thermoreceptors that are in your skin, their job is to detect temperature changes. And that is your stimulus. So that example that I used, you step outside from this nice cool environment, you go outside and it's hot, all right? So that change in the heat, or excuse me, that change in the temperature, all right, is the stimulus. And that will activate those thermoreceptors. So now they're going to take that information and they're going to transmit that information to your control center, okay? So basically what will happen is those thermoreceptors are going to send what we call sensory information on your sensory nerves to your central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord, all right? So your control center can either be part of the nervous system, okay, or the endocrine system. Now, some of you might not know what these are, okay? The nervous system, all right, is based on our nerves, and that's based on an electrical impulse that travels within our nerves. And some of you are thinking, electrical impulse? Don't worry. When we get to chapter 12, I'll explain all that to you, okay? It's really quite phenomenal, right? But it does use electrical impulses, okay? We call those action potentials, right? So the nervous system is based on electrical input, all right? And the endocrine system is going to be based on chemical, all right? Perfect example, a thyroid gland. It's going to produce thyroxine, helps maintain your metabolism, all right? Adrenal glands, they release, all right, epinephrine and norepinephrine, what we call adrenaline, okay? That's going to be a chemical, okay? You're going to talk about that, the endocrine system in chapter 17, which is which is in Bio 211. So I'm not going to discuss that too much right now, okay? So that receptor detects a stimulus, sends that information, all right, to the control center. And this is what happens in the control center, all right? The control center is going to interpret that input. It's going to look at the input and it's going to say, all right, well, what is this? What's going on? Okay, temperature is increasing, okay? So now we got to figure out a way to help the body adjust to that. So it's going to initiate some changes. So the control center is going to send messages through what we call a motor neuron. You don't have to worry about that now, okay? But it's going to send that information to what we call the effector, all right? And it's the effector, all right, which is a structure that's going to bring about those changes, all right, to alter that stimulus. Now, what you have to understand is, it's real basic, all right? There's two types of effectors in the body, muscles and glands. That's it. So you're going to hear me say things like the effector organ, And when I'm talking about an effector organ, I'm referring to either a muscle or a gland. We'll get into more details about that, okay? So our three components are the receptor, the control center, and the effector. If you want a little bit more detail, here is more detail on that, okay? So we start off with our stimulus, all right? The stimulus is detected by the receptor. That receptor relays that information to the control center, brain or spinal cord, or through the endocrine system. The control center then is going to interpret that information, and it's going to figure out how it wants to respond to that stimulus. And when it figures out how it wants to do that, it's going to send that information to the effectors. All right. And the effectors are either a muscle or a gland of some sort. And that those effectors are going to initiate some sort of change and hopefully keep the body it'll keep the body in homeostasis. Or if that stimulus knocked us out of homeostasis, those effectors will return us back to homeostasis. I'll give you some examples. Let's talk about some examples. All right, this is an important slide here. I guarantee you, if you know this slide, you are going to nail it. You're going to kick butt. And if you know Nail It, it's a cooking show on Netflix. All right, if you're ever interested, I'm always looking for good ideas of shows to watch. All right, so if anyone has any suggestions, always feel free to let me know. Okay, all right, so let's talk about some examples. All right, so here's just the basic picture of what I just explained to you. Okay, so you can see here we have our little dial here. All right, so something's going on, something's too low. All right, let's say your body temperature has dropped. Okay, it's really cold. All right, we want to keep you in homeostasis, which is this right here. Okay, so the stimulus occurs. All right, you're now going from a nice, comfortably temperature regulated room, and you walk into a freezer for whatever reason. Okay, so the freezer is saying, oh, it's really cold. All right, so that's the stimulus, that cold temperature. The thermal regulators detect that cold temperature, all right, because they're located in your skin, and they send that information to the control center, okay, which is either going to be your central nervous system or your endocrine system. And then the control center decides what is happening, and then it decides how it's going to respond. And once it does, it sends that what we call output information to the effector gland, or excuse me, the effector organ, which is a muscle or a gland. And that gland or that muscle is going to bring about change, all right, to that stimulus to bring us back into homeostasis. All right, let's give you a specific, all right, a specific example here. All right, I'm going to come back to this in a second. So here we go. Here's our friend sitting ice fishing. Ice fishing. He gets cold, okay, because he's sitting on ice in the middle of winter. All right, and so the stimulus, you can see his body temperature has dropped. So the receptors in his skin, all right, have determined. All right, the receptors in the skin have picked up that cold temperature, all right, and they send that information to the hypothalamus, all right, what we call the master gland. The hypothalamus is located inside your brain, okay? So it sends that information to the hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus is in charge of maintaining your body temperature. And it realizes that the body temperature now has decreased and gone below the acceptable range. And so it decides, well, we need to warm the body up. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to send to the effector organs what I want to happen to warm the body up. So what does happen? All right, well, one, all right, you start to shiver. So your skeletal muscles are going to contract and relax quickly. And that shivering is going to generate heat. Also, what will happen is blood is one degrees Celsius above your normal body temperature. Bet you didn't know that. Well, now you do. So we're going to take the blood that's in our skin and we're going to move it, because your skin is your largest organ. So we're going to take all that blood, or most of that blood, and we're going to move it to the internal organs. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to move that blood from the skin towards your kidneys, your liver, your heart, your stomach, all of that. All right? And that will help to warm us up, thereby returning our low body temperature back to the normal homeostatic body temperature range. Okay, so let me go back to this previous slide here. This is called the negative feedback loop. And this is one of the ways that we're able to regulate our homeostasis. Okay, this negative feedback is used by the body mostly. Okay, what I mean is most of the processes that happen, most of the chemical reactions, all right, most of our physiological processes that are occurring are utilize the negative feedback. And so what will happen is pretty much whatever the stimulus is, the resulting action will be opposite of that. Okay, so let's use body temperature, for example. All right, your body temperature is normally 98.6. No, wait, you're 90. Hold on one second. Come on, erase. There we go. All right. I'm drawing this too big. So does anyone know what the maximum for body temperature can be? Did I do that?
104.
104, close. The normal is, for the normal range is 99.1. I know I got my body temperature range wrong. And then the low is 94.6. Scratch that out. All right. You know what? I'm doing a horrible job. Let's do this because I'm rushing. All right. Normal body temperature is 98.6. The range for that is 96. Hold on. I hate when it does that. 96. You guys, I'm sorry. The computer is being a pain in the butt. That's what I'm looking for. Here we go. All right. I was looking for you earlier. All right. 99.1 to 94.6. All right, that's your normal, wrong way. 96.4. Okay, that's your normal range, what you're seeing there, 99.1 to 96.4. Okay, and then our normal is 98.6. That's our set point. All right, so 98.6 is what we call the set point. All right, so that's going to be where this black line is here. So our body temperature fluctuates all the time between 99.1, all right, scratch that out, and 96.4. All the time it fluctuates through that. Now, some people's normal might be a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but the point being is that's what we're looking at. So your body wants to keep it within that range, but sometimes it goes above it, or sometimes it goes below it. So if it gets too high, all right, then negative feedback will want to reduce your body temperature. So you get a fever, let's say. Okay, you get a fever of 102. So your body's going to try to reduce that. And so the resulting action is going to always be in the opposite direction of whatever that stimulus would be. And in this case, if it's 102.4, then your body's going to want to decrease, all right, your body temperature to try to lower that temperature back into that normal range there. And that's called the negative feedback mechanism. So we'll see that here in this example that I gave you. Hold on one second. Bye. All right. Here, okay, whoops. Come on back. Where's my annotation? There we go. All right. I'm still learning this. Clear all drawings. Boom. Okay. Let's do the example here with heat. Okay. You're outside chopping wood like this guy is. Your body temperature starts to rise. So your sensory receptors, the thermal receptors, respond to that, okay, by sending information again to the hypothalamus saying, hey, the body temperature is increasing, all right, we need to cool the body down. So we're going to use that negative feedback mechanism and flip it, okay? So we're going to decrease the body temperature. So the hypothalamus is now going to send, all right, messages, all right, to the effector organs, glands, which are going to be our sweat glands, and also it's going to send information to the muscles, all right, that control your blood flow, all right, to your skin. And it's going to increase the blood flow to your skin because now, remember, blood is warmer, all right, than your normal body temperature. So we get that blood to the surface of the skin, the heat will escape from the blood and it will be given off from your skin, causing you to cool down along with sweat. All right, all of that will help to decrease, all right, your body temperature. And that's basically what we're going to do. And we're going to talk about a lot of these, all right, throughout Bio 210 and 211. We'll talk about the withdrawal reflex, all right, in chapter 15, all right. You will learn about how heart rate and blood pressure occurs during exercise and whatnot. All these other ones you'll talk about. We talk about the parathyroid hormone release when we have decreased calcium. Because what will happen is when your blood calcium is low, okay, your parathyroid gland releases parathyroid hormone. And what will happen is it prevents your kidneys from getting rid of calcium, all right, and it causes bone to break down in a safe way to release calcium that's stored within your bone. And where does that calcium go? It goes from the bone into your blood, and therefore it increases your blood calcium levels. That's going to be negative feedback. We'll talk about all that, okay, throughout the course. All right. If you have negative feedback, we're going to have positive feedback. This is used less frequently in the body, okay? But you want to understand that the stimulus occurs and whatever action that results is always going to be in the same direction, all right, to help get the body to return to homeostasis. All right, great example for that is blood clotting. All right, you're bleeding, okay? All right, the stimulus is you're bleeding. We need to stop the bleeding. So the blood clotting will occur and it will keep occurring until you stop bleeding, okay? Breastfeeding and labor, same thing, all right? I'll show you a picture here. Here's our baby, okay? The baby is the stimulus, all right? The baby is suckling on mom, okay? Mom has receptors in her breast that send information to the hypothalamus once again. The hypothalamus then is going to stimulate the posterior pituitary gland to release oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone that causes breast milk to be ejected from the breast, okay? And the milk is released as long as the baby keeps feeding. If the baby stops feeding, they grow older, mom is not breastfeeding as much, her milk production decreases, all right, because that positive reinforcement, that positive feedback is no longer occurring because less and less sensory information is stimulating the hypothalamus to stimulate the posterior pituitary to release oxytocin, all right? So as long as there's a stimulus there, that will keep this whole process going. But if that stimulus is less frequent or it becomes non-existent, then the whole feedback mechanism stops altogether, okay? So really this slide right here, if I can say, all right, that one of the most important slides that we've been discussing today is this one right here. All right, you need to know this, all right, that our homeostasis or homeostatic system is dynamic, means it's changing all the time, okay? There's three components to it: the receptor, control center, and effector. You need to have a stimulus to stimulate the receptor, okay? Our control center is either going to be the nervous system or the endocrine system. Most homeostatic systems are regulated through negative feedback. There's some that are utilized through positive feedback. And if this whole system breaks down, then, all right, we are out of homeostasis or in a homeostatic imbalance and disease occurs. That's when pathology starts to set on. So if you know this slide, then you have a pretty good understanding of chapter 1. Okay. Let's clear this out. Here is, there we go. All right, some of the normal ranges for homeostasis. All right, so 98.6 is going to be, all right, our set point. Wait, that's the wrong one. There we go. All right, so keep in mind, all right, 96.4 to 99.1 is the normal range. All right, blood glucose 80 to 110. If it's increased, then you're going to have an issue there. All right, blood pressure. The normal range for blood pressure, I don't really like how that's written. The low range is usually 90 over 60, and the high range is 140 over 90. Okay, so the average is usually 120. Okay, how do we get all this information? We just take a whole bunch of data through the scientific method, of course, from a bunch of healthy individuals. We see what they are. We create our range, all right, our low and high. Okay, most of those individuals, all right, 95% of the majority are going to fall inside of that range. A small percentage, all right, 5% or less, all right, will still be healthy, all right, but their values will be outside of that normal range. My brother-in-law, he is one of those folks that his body temperature has always been a little bit higher. And so a high temperature for him, like 101 or is not a terribly, well, around 100, I should say, is not a terrible thing for him. All right, he just runs high. All right. Okay, so perfect example for when we are in homeostatic imbalance is diabetes. Okay, with diabetes, you'll see, clear this off here. All right, you'll see folks that have an issue regulating their blood glucose, okay, or blood sugar, you hear. All right, there's different types of diabetes, all right, diabetes insipidus, diabetes mellitus, all right, but basically, all right, let's use diabetes type 1. That's when the pancreas has the inability for producing glucose. Glucose is the hormone that takes macromolecules and puts them into the cells. So basically what it does is it takes your glucose, the sugar that's in your blood, and it takes it out of the blood and puts it into the cells. All right. So what will happen is folks that have diabetes, that insulin is absent, so they'll have high blood sugar levels. And that's going to be a problem. There's a whole litany of symptoms that go along with that. So a lot of times they'll complain of frequent urination, for example. Okay, and so what happens is they present with these symptoms. They go to their doctor. All right, the doctor comes up with a diagnosis and figures out, using, of course, the scientific method, all right, a way to treat this patient for their diabetes. If it's type 1, it usually requires insulin. Okay, if it's type 2, usually diet and exercise is a great way to help it, and certain types of medications will also assist it. All right, But usually what results is once we fall into that homeostatic imbalance or the disease, then we have to come up with a diagnosis to find out what caused the homeostatic imbalance. And in a lot of cases, medication and or surgery will result. Okay. All right, almost done here, guys. All right, again, using the scientific method here to develop that diagnosis. Patient comes in, we examine the patient, we ask the patient questions, we gather data on the patient by taking a patient history, vitals, do some testing, all right? And then we figure out, when we talk about our initial hypothetical diagnosis, we call that a differential diagnosis. We come up with all these different possibilities. And then through tests and observation and collection of data, we can scratch certain diagnoses off the list until we finally come up, all right, with what we call our definitive diagnosis. Then we know what's bothering this person, and then we can then treat them for whatever their condition is. And then in a lot of cases, like I said, once we have the diagnosis, then we can treat the patient. Some of those treatments may involve drugs, all right? So perfect example is depression, all right? We have a specific type, what we call second generation drugs, all right? What's also known as SSRIs, which stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, all right? And what these drugs will do is they will increase the amount of serotonin in and around our nerve cells, all right, especially in the brain. And this increased level of serotonin, all right, will help to decrease depression and help elevate the mood there, okay? Insulin will help certain metformin, perfect example for people with diabetes type 2, all right? That drug will help with blood sugar levels, okay? Now, unfortunately, there are side effects to medications. And so we have to determine whether or not these side effects are within an acceptable range of safety for this patient. If not, then we might have to change our treatment for this patient. All right. So it's always one of those things in which we have to kind of figure out, all right, what is going to be appropriate for this patient, what will be good, and then hopefully what will be bad, and we can avoid what will be bad for that patient there. And then here's some pictures of just some of our medical imaging for some of the things that we will see in this semester. We'll talk about that. That's going to be mostly in lab. Oh, I saw that somebody chatted me. What does, SSRI stands for, and I know I said it, but there you go. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. It's a class. It's a drug class. It just helps to boost serotonin. Serotonin is what we call a neurotransmitter. We'll learn about what neurotransmitters are in chapter 12. All right, it's very exciting stuff. All right, normally this is where I would ask for questions, but I'm going to save that. All right, I want to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back into on the lab side. And I'll take any questions then. So I want everybody, we're going to leave this meeting and we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes in the lab section. Okay, so let me stop recording here.